Before we hear a welcome from Toronto Finance International, our great partner for this webinar, I would of course like to welcome everyone that's joining in. My name is Michal Kaczmarski, and I'm America's FinTech lead for InvestHK, the governmental agency that focuses on supporting companies in their overseas expansion to Asia via Hong Kong. We'll get more of intro of myself and what I do throughout the webinar. But just for the purposes of this this webinar, this event is going to last about an hour or so, and a big chunk of that will be devoted to Q&A and our this fireside chat. We want to keep it interesting for everyone, and we want to keep the forum of this open. And since our focus is on fintech and financial services, we would appreciate questions, particularly focusing on that. We're always happy to talk about the business climate in Hong Kong and our help in that regard, and also potential of your companies in Hong Kong. And lastly, in order to keep things running smoothly, if you would like to raise a question, if you would like our panelists to answer questions, please type them in the Q&A box that you can see in your Zoom app, instead of raising questions or sending them in private messages. My colleague Chen is going to be keeping track of those Q&A questions and moderate them. So having said all that, this is it from me for now in terms of the housekeeping. And now I'd like to ask Daniel Malik, who's filling in for Jennifer Reynolds, to give welcoming remarks.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Daniel Malik. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Stakeholder Relations for Toronto Finance International. For those of you that don't know, my organization has a mandate to grow and promote Toronto as a global financial center. As some of you may know, Toronto is now the second largest financial center in North America, and less known, has the third ranked technology hub in North America. And part of being a global financial center is having the ability or the opportunity to look at overseas markets such as Hong Kong. And thus we're very excited to have our three colleagues here, who I'm sure will give us a very comprehensive and informative presentation on not only the fintech ecosystem in Hong Kong, but the various expansive and substantial government support programs that are also offered. I've seen Chris's presentation before, and I can attest to the fact that it is quite good in terms of providing an overview of the market and the various programs that are available to fintechs that want to set up in the actual who actually want to set up in the region. So I think with that, I will turn it now over to Chris.
Hi, everybody. I just want to thank Toronto Finance International. I'd like to thank Edith for joining us today. I realize that we have participants from all over North America right now. My specialty, even though I am the head of InvestHK for Canada, I'm actually, by my experience, I'm a FinTech practitioner. So I will be taking part in the fireside chat. I've also been tasked with the dull part of this. I've actually got the presentation. But as Daniel has said, he endorses it as being an interesting one. So I'm hoping that all of you will be able to learn something from it. So, I just want to say that why are we here today? And, why Hong Kong? Why now? And it's actually a story that goes from Hong Kong's history as a financial center to leveraging its bench strengths from a financial center to new investments in relevant technologies. But just as an offside, I just want to first talk a little bit about InvestHK as a whole. I realize that a lot of you probably don't know who InvestHK is. We're actually an agency of the Hong Kong SAR government tasked with foreign direct investment and high-level trade. What that effectively means is that we put Canadian companies into Asia Pacific via Hong Kong, and we don't just put you into Hong Kong, we actually make sure that you fly once you're there. So, we do everything for free. And in terms of our services, the basic stuff was, we introduce you to professional firms that help you establish and register your business, like law firms, consulting firms, accounting, corporate secretaries. But let's be honest, a lot of companies do that. As an agency of the government, we will, once you're in Hong Kong, we will introduce you to potential partners that ensure that you do well. For example, we will introduce you to investors, whether it's angel investors, venture capitalists, investor networks. We'll introduce you to corporates like banks, insurance companies, e-commerce giants, multipliers, accelerators, trade associations, think tanks. We will introduce you to universities if in the event that, for example, we worked with an insurance company, we worked with Intact, for example, to tap into local universities, PhD programs for computer science and customer analytics. We will introduce you to Hong Kong incorporated sister agencies like ASTRI, Hong Kong Productivity Council, Science Park, Cyberport, and so on. And as being part of the Hong Kong government, we will of course help you with immigration matters. If you're a fintech company in need of a license, we will help you with the regulators, such as the SFC, Monetary Authority, the Insurance Authority. And because, well, we're part of the bridge between Canada and Hong Kong, we will put you in touch with the Canadian Trade Commission. We work hand in hand with them, but we both have a mandate to ensure that Canadian companies do well. So, Hong Kong has been in the news a lot, and admittedly, not all of it has been positive, but I want to get to the facts about what Hong Kong is. And if you didn't know a lot about it, I just want to make these facts extremely pertinent. Hong Kong is one of the global top capital markets. It's actually one of the top 3 global financial centers of the planet, along with New York and London. In terms of Asia, it is the best location, is the #1 location for IPO and M&A activity. It is the world's leading investment hub for foreign direct investment inflows in Asia. It is one of the easiest places to do business. You can set up a business in 1.5 days. It has one of the world's lowest tax jurisdictions. Personal income tax and corporate tax are both capped at less than 20%. It is ruled by law, meaning it is based on British law. For Canadian businesses, this may come across as meaningless, but when you are in a region where many of the jurisdictions may not abide by your sales agreements, you can always go back to a Hong Kong court of law for your dispute resolution. When you win it, if you win it, that ruling will be adhered to in the other jurisdictions. Another thing you may not know is that Hong Kong is now part of a larger ecosystem called the Greater Bay Area. It's got a population of 70 million, taking into account Hong Kong plus Guangdong province, and a GDP of 1.5 trillion. In effect, this is a super microeconomy, kind of like the Bay Area of California, the Ruhr Valley of Germany, many other super corridors. It sort of works kind of like the Nexus Pass between Canada and the United States, where, for example, if you resided in Hong Kong, you could actually work across the border during the day and go home to Hong Kong at night, and vice versa. So, going back to what Hong Kong's bench strength is by tradition, since the 1960s, 1970s, Hong Kong has been a giant in terms of financial services. Right now, it is the world's largest equity fundraising center. It is the 3rd largest bond center in Asia, ex-Japan. This has created a legacy of there's a lot of money, there's a lot of capital in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of financial expertise. With all this capital and all this expertise, therein lies new opportunities. Therein lies new potential for investment. There's been a wide range of industries with governmental support. Several years ago, there was the creation of the Innovation and Technology Commission, which formed into an Innovation and Technology Fund. This is a fund that's worth about US $13 billion. Basically, it's a giant public pot created by the government for investments in innovation and technology. Now, of course, no one company ever wins it all. I mean, that's pie in the sky. And the government being what it is, being a force of government bureaucrats, are not investment experts. So what the government has done is actually ensured that a number of government agencies or pseudo-government agencies act as agents of disbursement for this government fund. A number of investment agents in this regard, InvestHK happens to be one of them. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority is another. The SFC, the Insurance Authority, Cyberport, and Science Park each have within their power the ability to disperse portions of this fund to those companies that are within the strategic interests of the Hong Kong government. And this is just the public sector. The net result is that there's been a strong pipeline of startup investments in Hong Kong. From 2014, when there were only 1,000 startups, there are now 3,000 startups. Also during the same time period, from a period of roughly about 2,000 employees, there are now about 12,500 employees. This is basic. And we have admittedly not done the best job in terms of promoting our startup initiatives to the world. So for many people around the world, this is relatively new information. However, this session is based around the fintech sector. And so there are HK government schemes specifically relevant to fintech. And my colleague Michael can go into further detail about this. This chart is probably overwhelming to everyone here, including myself. But from company setup all the way to overseas expansion, under the auspices of the Hong Kong government agencies, such as the Monetary Authority, SFC, and Insurance Authority, the government acts as a grandfather to fintech companies all the way to expanding outside of Hong Kong. Now that was all public. In terms of private, in terms of the two main avenues being venture capital investment and IPO fundraising, venture capital investments over the last 5 to 6 years, specifically towards fintech companies, has reached about 1.5 billion USD. In terms of IPO fundraising, a little bit of a background, the Hong Kong stock market, Hong Kong Exchange, has ranked global number one for 6 of the past 10 years. It has ranked number 1 in total IPO funds raised. It has raised a total of US $10 billion specifically for fintech related companies in Hong Kong. FYI, it's been a grand total of 143 billion USD raised in IPOs in Hong Kong in 2019. 2019 was a banner year for secondary listings, the most famous of which was the Alibaba secondary listings. Suffice to say, after that listing, a number of companies approached the Hong Kong Exchange to inquire about secondary listings. And some of them are listed already on the London Exchange or on the Paris Exchange or on the Toronto Exchange. But where is all this private funding coming from? Well, Hong Kong is a leading international asset management hub. There's about 3.1 trillion USD of Hong Kong assets under management and about 1,600 licensed asset managers in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is ranked 2nd in Asia for private equity capital under management. That is not going anywhere soon. The main reason for that is that mainland China supports the engagement of Hong Kong private equity funds in the financing innovation technology enterprises in the Greater Bay Area. You may or may not know that Hong Kong functions as a gateway to Chinese investments, as 70% of outgoing renminbi flows through Hong Kong, and vice versa. For a lot of companies investing into China, they like the idea of the rule of law, commercial law, low taxes, and therefore a lot of foreign firms are using Hong Kong as an entrepot to invest into China. The net result of that is the number of unicorns, in other words, startup companies with at least a 1 billion USD valuation has been growing. In 2017, it has grown from 17 to 28 by last year. So Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area, is basically taking advantage of the amount of capitalization as well as the investment management that is concentrated in Hong Kong. And I just have to stress that that degree of concentration of capital and financial expertise, particularly when it comes to Chinese equity, is not found anywhere else in the world. And Hong Kong plays a crucial role in the global financial system because of that pole position that it holds. There is no city in the world that can take over that role. So where are we today? You know, what is the fintech, Hong Kong fintech ecosystem today? Right now, there's about 600 fintech companies in Hong Kong, and 37% of those fintech founders come from overseas. 53% of those companies sees Hong Kong as a base for global expansion. You know, and there's a reason for that. And one more fact: 51% of companies operating in Hong Kong plan to expand in the Greater Bay Area, and there's a reason for that. Hong Kong is a city. It's got a population of about 7 million people. In some aspects of fintech, the market is very competitive. Therefore, a lot of companies use Hong Kong as a base for Greater Bay Area or Asia Pacific expansion. And it's a perfect hub for reaching all of Asia Pacific. It's 4 hours flight from anywhere, maximum. Plus the rule of law, intellectual property protection, low taxation, and usage of the English language makes Hong Kong ideal for fintech companies choosing Hong Kong as a startup base. The top motivations to expand into GBA, according to an HSBC and KPMG survey done in January, was overall access to a larger market. Yes, again, it echoes Hong Kong is small, but the ability to penetrate and access a larger market like the GBA or the rest of Asia Pacific is an overwhelming reason to be there. Another reason, the second biggest reason, is getting closer to business partners and customers. That's a truism in working the Asia Pacific market. Relationships are extremely important. You have to meet people. You know, we live in the day and age where we're doing this, we're meeting people through webinars, through Zoom, through Google Meet. But sooner or later, in order to establish that need for trust, we do need to network. And being at an international hub certainly is conducive to that effect. Access to talent, Hong Kong, Chinese, Southeast Asian, North Asian, infrastructure, lower cost, harmonization, they're all factors into expanding into the GBA. Now I realize this slide is probably completely unreadable to most people, but basically it's a proof point that shows how InvestHK has actually been conducive towards getting Canadian companies into Hong Kong. I'm just going to highlight some of the companies here in orange. We have put the Bureau d'Immigration de Quebec into Hong Kong. We put the CPPIB, Intact Financial, that we just finished that one in March, actually. Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, RBC, University of Western Ontario, Macmillan LLP, the Toronto Stock Exchange, that one's close to finished. UBC, Vancouver Airport Authority, Manulife Bank, Scotiabank, and so on. Those are the more famous companies we put in. There are about 200 Canadian companies in Hong Kong. InvestHK put 175 of them, approximately, there. At this point, I would like to kickstart the fireside chat, and I'd like to reintroduce the other speakers on this panel. I will share the contact details, how to get in touch with us towards the end. But I'd like to make this I'd like to introduce Michal and Edith to the audience. Edith is a general partner at Proof of Capital, an early stage Silicon Valley venture capital fund. She's also the author and creator of the China Internet Report, an annual report on China technology trends, widely read amongst investors and corporate executives. She has invested in over 50 startups, including Lightyear, Silk Labs, Chirp, Plexi, Solana, Oasis Labs, and many, many more. I will just reintroduce Michal Kaczmarski one more time. He is the America's FinTech lead at InvestHK, based in San Francisco. He's been with us for about 3 years, assisting work with InvestHK's 6 offices in the Americas, from here in Canada all the way down south to Chile. To date, Michal has supported over 30 fintechs from Americas in their successful setup in HK. So I have a number of early questions. I encourage people to start sending in their questions via the chat. And the first question is related to, well, the pandemic. Has COVID-19 changed the approach to technology by financial institutions? What changes have you seen reflected in the fintech industry so far? Go ahead. Michal or Edith?
Edith, I'll let ladies go first.
What have to be ladies first? I wanted to talk about like COVID-19, not necessarily just for fintech alone. I think overall, because we are talking about finance related things, and you know, both technology investment and finance are both of course heavily impacted, mostly starting with, well, in March, the stock market. Literally, like in a day, you know, we dropped to like 18,000 points, but in some ways so strange, like what's happening on Main Street doesn't really impact Wall Street. So now all the way back up to the all-time high. So I think roller coaster is an understatement. In general, I think we should look at it at like a couple of angles. One is because what I focus on is venture capital, particular early stage investments. So related to fintech, I think, or just investment or early stage investment in general, I think there have been some slowdown, not because we don't want to invest, but if you think about it, like particularly related to investment plus fintech investment, you look at the stock market, it's kind of scare you quite a bit. A couple things happen. I'm the type of person, even though it's not that we don't want to invest, but because of the macro level, sort of drive many of us thinking, okay, how long is this gonna last? And wanted to think through overall more macro trend market. But at the same time, as a early stage investor, the worst time is the best time. We actually think that crisis create so many opportunities, especially, I don't know about all of you guys in Toronto. Michael and I are still stuck at home. And when you are sitting at home and you can't do anything else, particularly related to banking, you like no bank is open. My Wells Fargo outside is still shut today, right? So when things like this happen, it's been 3 months, there's a lot of really sort of unwanted forced innovation that happens. So in some sense, particularly for early stage investment, for anything, I'm super excited because this is a time where it's time for us to go in. At the same time, I don't know the audience if some of you are entrepreneurs thinking about going to Hong Kong, or some of you are investors. I think that we are all about, you know, wanting to invest at this time. At the same time, it's really kind of thinking through, all right, this is a must-ask question from any investor to entrepreneurs is, how's COVID impacting you as a company? So it's a standard question, and we always ask, and by the way, your answer will vary. Depends on, are you more B2B, developers focused, or B2C? We see a lot of the consumer focus, particularly with online education, telemedicine, online gaming, a lot of the consumer where perfect for stuck at home is doing awesome. At the same time, we're also very cautious about it, thinking, okay, if COVID hopefully do go away one day, is your number going to drop? So in some sense, I think we're cautious about that. But it impacted quite a bit. I actually wrote an article about how do you pitch on Zoom, by the way. And because most of the meeting is done through this medium. So I think in terms of impact, absolutely. Are we slowing down? We're not slowing down, but the process is taking much longer. Because the reality is all the due diligence needs to be done online. You can't see each other face to face, but it's okay. There's still a lot of venture capital in Hong Kong, in Silicon Valley. It's very active. But I think the best time is you can be sitting in Toronto. Obviously, we want you to go to Hong Kong, but your reach could be worldwide because now everybody is okay with it for you to work remotely and be able to access the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have, sorry, go ahead.
Maybe if I could build on what Edith said. Actually, from what we see, and I'm going to assume, like Edith, that most people that are participating in this webinar run companies or run expansion efforts for fintechs, and they're looking at potentially expanding to Asia. So from that perspective, what we see and we have always seen is companies coming to us saying, you know, I want to expand to Hong Kong. We are particularly attractive as Hong Kong when it comes to B2B sales. So financial services, I mean banks or insurance companies or hedge funds, that type of clients. And so they come to us for introductions always typically, and you know, we are happy to support as much as we can. But what have changed recently when companies come to us and they say, you know, I would like to get introduced to banks so I can start selling my product to Hong Kong. Most banks or most other companies right now, because of COVID-19, they ask, okay, but how is your product relevant right now? So is that something that's going to help our bank operate in a contactless basis? Or is it something that's going to enable us to work more, I don't know, control the work of our employees more remotely or encrypt our services? And I think that's particularly from technological point of view, there's a wealth of opportunities, particularly to those companies that may not necessarily be the classical fintechs in a word, but I would say software providers where fintech or financial services are one of the areas. So all those enablers that can help banks or insurance companies operate more efficiently, but also if you can twist your story or your product in such a way that it looks like they should talk to you right now, rather than 6 months from now or a year from now, then this is where there is a particularly good appetite for looking at those products. That also, to what Edith mentioned, this actually opened a pretty good opportunity because in the past, personal meeting was the key. You would have to go to Hong Kong physically and meet with bank representatives, insurance companies. It's still a very important part, but at least you can have those initial meetings that are not going to be just courtesy meetings, but actually meaningful first level meetings from the comfort of Toronto without investing to travel. And one more thing that's changed since last year, and that's an important one, not related to COVID, but something that I would like our attendees to be alerted to. Last year, Hong Kong Monetary Authority awarded 8 digital banking licenses. And that really opened a big gate for companies that provide technological solutions for banks, because that means there's going to be 8 new nimble players in the space. They will be looking how to differentiate themselves. So they will be looking for technological solutions, and also the existing 150 plus banks that are in Hong Kong that to date have been pretty fat and happy operating in the space because business has always been very good, also feel more of a pressure to do more. So sorry, this was a bit of a long-winded response maybe to that, but I really wanted to show that there's a good amount of momentum right now rather than just time to sit and wait.
Okay, here's another question for us. How do Hong Kong investors differ from U.S. investors? The understanding is that introductions are even more important to provide clout. I think you might have touched on that, Michael. And do they move slower or faster, for example, than is typical in the U.S.?
Maybe I can start, and Michael, please add on. So I happen to be both Hong Kong and US. So, and by the way, Chris, we did a rebrand just to end on this whole fast and slow. We rebranded Proof of Capital to a name called Raise Capital. And Raise is all about speed.
Oh, okay.
so because of that, we want to, see you, due diligence, give you answer even at a no as fast as possible. So that's sort of like our virtue. Having said that, on the difference between a Hong Kong venture investors versus US, I would say Hong Kong in terms of VC is definitely improving. I wanted to say that in Hong Kong, really quick landscape. So Sequoia, actually Chen lives in Hong Kong. And he actually set up a particular Hong Kong focused initiative called, I'm doing advertising for somebody else, but Hong Kong X, and which is very, very particular focus on like Hong Kong local investments. So, and then you can see there's at least, I am super critical of Hong Kong because I love Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is actually not very good at advertising, but even that, there's 7 unicorn in Hong Kong already. And 2 of them WeLab, and actually I write it down, so excuse me on that. At least a couple of them are definitely fintech focused, and many of them usually start with maybe some of the local angel investor will focus on investing, but usually because you're so close to China, and plus it really depends on sort of like what do you focus on in terms of market expansion. And many of these unicorn, regardless, is like Klook, SenseTime, all these guys, Air Wallets, are all actually get investment from Chinese VC as well. So I think like the key thing is if you're thinking about coming to Hong Kong, the first thing you should kind of think about is Hong Kong. It is a small market, but it's a very international market. You're talking about basically all the banks in China, all the banks in Europe, and all the banks in the US, Asia headquarters all in one place. So what the question that you need to ask yourself is not necessarily is the speed of a VC in Hong Kong versus US, which is faster. The question that you need to ask yourself is that, okay, Hong Kong is now my new headquarters, but where do I want to go? And then using Hong Kong, and I can tell you, like I actually have invested in a US company called FTX, moved to Hong Kong, and they're American because they want to service Asia clients. So, but they raise money from the US. So it's really kind of depends on who you're going after. Locally in Hong Kong, there's a handful of like Radiant Venture, Iron Fires, Vector. They're all really awesome early stage VCs, and they're very active. And they buy into, doesn't matter what story that you want to go. But the key thing is that you need to go in with very clear, set the stages, where do you want to focus on? That would be my question.
So maybe adding on to that, and I think your perspective is great, Edith, because you are actually a practitioner in that field. From my perspective, companies that talk to us and the way we operate, number one difference is introductions are a key. That of course also holds valid. I'm sure anywhere in the world. But what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's usually a snowball effect, and that's the way it works in Hong Kong. So we introduce people, for example, to one person when companies come to us and they say, well, we would like to maybe raise some funds, or we would like to get to know the RegTech space better. We choose the best person to introduce them to. And it might not seem like much. They don't end up with a list of like 20 people that we're going to introduce them to. But we choose one person that we know is going to be a connector. And if that person introduces you to others, this is already the first level of the kind of, you have this proof of approval that they should talk to you and get interested. So my advice would be to anyone who wants to build the network in Hong Kong is to don't dismiss introductions. Go to Hong Kong when you have and sort of be open to whoever you are being introduced, even if that doesn't necessarily seem like the most natural match at the very beginning. Number two thing that I think is extremely important, and I can talk from personal experience, as you might have guessed from my last name, I'm not a Hong Konger, wasn't born there, but what I've noticed is that it's very easy to be a local. If you are based there, if you show your affinity to Hong Kong and your interest in Hong Kong, if you are based there full time, that really helps people to kind of build trust and build those connections. And again, you can benefit from that snowball effect. That's why we tell companies, if you are looking to do business in Hong Kong, either if you're looking to raise funds or if you're looking to find clients, establish your operations in Hong Kong. It doesn't have to be necessarily a huge operation of 20 people and a flashy office in Central or Wan Chai, but just one desk at the co-working space and one person that's going to be your representative full time. Give it some time, build connections, maybe join, for example, Hong Kong Fintech Association, which kind of validates you as a local business, and that really helps with sort of building that local image. And I think the third difference, keep your WhatsApp and keep your WeChat ready. This is a typical way to communicate in Hong Kong. Until I joined Invest Hong Kong, I used WhatsApp mostly to connect with my parents from Poland. Right now I have my parents and Chinese investors on WhatsApp. They kind of this is two groups. So but yeah, that's one of the key differences.
And can I add on one thing, Chris? Is that okay?
Sure.
I would never make that mistake again. I just wanted, I didn't realize, so one of our unicorns from Hong Kong is a GoGoVan. And the founder and CEO, Stephen, I guess he went to Berkeley. And when he was in school, he apparently pitched me on his previous idea before, and I do not remember at all. And then many years later, I met Stephen again, and it was on stage somewhere. He's like, we actually met at Berkeley. So then I realized I would never make that mistake again. If you're gonna go to Hong Kong and you're working on something now, I want to meet you now, not before, like not 10 years later when you're super successful in Hong Kong, because I can tell you, except, I'm literally looking at my list, I think except SenseTime, BitMax is, I think Arthur is from Buffalo, FTX is from Berkeley, WeLab, Simon, CEO, went to Stanford, Air Wallace is from Australia, GoGoVan, Stephen went to Berkeley, like pretty much everybody is from somewhere else, and somehow they all make it back to Hong Kong. And then I can probably meet half of them being in the valleys, but somehow I didn't. So that's why, like, I want to hang out with Michael and Chris all day long, because I don't want to miss that opportunity again. And other than I'm like really wanted to invest in awesome companies, I really think that we're all like global citizens. It doesn't really matter where we're at. We're going to Hong Kong because, at least for me, is a business choice, because it's great for going to Asia.
And GoGoVan, by the way, for those that are not familiar, maybe with the startup ecosystem, is one of the biggest Hong Kong success stories, right? They're a unicorn. Yeah. So.
Next question: is seed traction the same in Hong Kong as it is in Silicon Valley? For example, a US $1 million AR seed, A, B, or even later. Is seed traction the same in Hong Kong as it is in Silicon Valley?
The way that I look at Hong Kong companies is not about like where they're located, but where they're going after. So I think if some of you are traveling from Toronto, and the question that I usually will ask you is, okay, you may pick Hong Kong as a great testing ground to test out your MVP with some initial traction. But I would say I'm still going to hold you accountable in terms of traction. So, but again, B2B is B2C is very different. I think if you're a B2B company and I have to always going to ask you, all right, if you're super early stage, I don't expect you to make revenue, but I do expect you have some, that's why you guys need to talk to Chris and Michael to figure it out. Okay, who are the good business partner or banks that we can potentially partner with, have some sort of proof of concept. So from an investment point of view, we're okay that you don't make revenue, but what we're not okay is that if you're doing B2B and enterprise, you need to know how to sell and you need to know how to do business development. So in terms of that sort of traction, that's what we're looking for. But if you are a B2C, so consumer app, whatever you're working on FinTech, then my standard question is always going to be, what's your install base? What's your MAU? What's your DAU? What's your churn? What's your ARPU? Even though you don't make money today, it's okay, but you have to be very, very clear understanding. So I'm not going to hold you like any different of metric just because you're labeled Hong Kong company. You happen to be in Hong Kong because it's strategic choice of growth, but your understanding of growth, we're going to keep you as global standard, just like what we will look at deals in Silicon Valley.
Okay. Next question. What about government funding into fintechs? I think Michael will take this. I did show a chart about that, but I didn't go into any detail.
My favorite question, happy to take it. And so I'll be happy to also share that chart in a minute. One thing that I think I would like to stress is there's no such thing as easy money in Hong Kong. That applies to VC funding. Although there is a lot of money, it's by and large smart money, and same goes for Hong Kong. So we tend to promote the idea that it's great if you could validate your product first, and if you could get either organic revenue or funding first in your local market for expansion. But there is an increasing number of funding programs for fintechs. And so let me just share my screen real quick. I hope you can see. I hope you can see my screen now. So very quickly, I'm not going to go through all the programs, but what is important to understand is in order to obtain most of the programs that are grants from the government, you have to be an incorporated entity in Hong Kong. Incorporation is very fast and easy. You can actually do it without leaving Toronto. We're happy to advise on how to do it. As it happens, this fiscal year, government waived registration fees. So not only you can do it in a fast way, but also for free. And as I mentioned, majority of the grants are related to R&D. We have enterprise support scheme that's an R&D support program for up to 10 million Hong Kong dollars. So that would be about 1.8 Canadian. And there's a number of rebates on R&D programs. You also get funding for hiring employees if they graduate from Hong Kong universities, particularly with PhD degrees. And actually, one of the most popular programs and most of the interesting programs is technology voucher scheme. It's a very clever program from the government of Hong Kong where you do not get any funds, but your potential clients do get funds to buy your product. So if you do a great pitch, if you tell a bank, this is my CRM solution, buy from me, and bank says it's great, but we don't have budget for it this year, you can show them how to fill out a technology voucher application, and then you can access those funds. 600,000 Hong Kong is about a little bit over 80,000 Canadian dollars. Please double check my conversion. My math is usually terrible. But overall, there is a number of funds. We as Invest Hong Kong are very happy to advise companies on what they qualify for and what's the most fitting for them. There's also two entities that I would like to mention right now in relation to funds. And again, because we are throwing a lot of different names and a lot of different entities, no need to remember everything. We will be happy to be contacted after the webinar to mention them again. There is the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, which is Hong Kong's prime science entity that has a number of programs leading startups all the way from the incubation stage to the exit. So they have different tiers into which they accept companies and can navigate them. You become a resident of the science park, and then you can benefit from a number of entities that a number of initiatives that they have, starting with grants through help with fundraising. They actually have a dedicated team that helps the residents with fundraising, to access to PR and accounting help. And that is particularly interesting for companies, again, that want to focus on R&D in Hong Kong. Interestingly, Science Park will be launching later this year a new fintech dedicated hub in Kowloon Town, which, if you don't know, Hong Kong is the Brooklyn of Hong Kong. This is where the cool kids are, and that entity is focusing on mixing banks with startups. So there will be innovation labs of banks co-located with startups. So Science Park will have a very interesting offering. So for those of our webinar attendees that are interested in maybe getting the foot through the door in Hong Kong, that way we will be happy to provide contacts to Science Park. And a second very interesting entity is Cyberport. The level of help that they provide is very similar to Science Park. Main difference between them two is that Cyberport doesn't focus so much on the science and R&D related issues. Their main help and focus would be on sales and marketing. That's where they help. And again, we will be glad to contact our attendees to those entities.
Okay, next question. Have you changed your investment criteria and metric system around it? If yes, how and how much? I think that's mostly towards Edith.
Yeah.
Is it because of COVID, or is that what I meant?
I think let's expand that to everything that's happened since last year.
So most of the venture fund, at least for us, is at least in the US, is mostly 10-year time frame. So just because there's a very traumatic event, it's not necessarily going to change our thesis per se, just because of an event. Because otherwise, we probably should not set up a venture capital fund. I should just do angel investment, because then I can change every single week if I want to. So not in that sense. Having said that, just because the thesis doesn't change, doesn't mean that the way that we work or the criteria is ever changing. Means like we definitely hold a much higher bar in terms of evaluating a company per se. Because right now, if you think about it, I think for a lot of the entrepreneur in the room, you have to think about, there are venture capital funds where they already have invested in many, many companies in the last few years, where it's such a bull run, where valuation is, in my language, is ridiculous, many sense. So some of these VCs have already invested in millions of dollars in the existing portfolio company. So therefore, they have to look at, okay, do they have enough money to survive? And usually, like, I would advise companies that, okay, you need at least 12 to 2 years of run rate to make sure that you're going to survive. And because of that, now, if you're brand new companies and you're thinking about raising, you need to know the fact that it's awesome that the bank in Hong Kong is so open-minded, where, okay, I need your help to go virtual, contactless, right? So there is an urgency for certain criteria, but at the same time, when we are like looking at you, we also need to kind of think about, are you realistic in terms of your run rate? Are you realistic in terms of your target revenue adjusted for this pandemic? Are you adjusted for anything that could happen to make sure that you can weather the storm? this is not like but the best thing is, you know what, this building company is not a leisure thing. It's a lot of hard work. So the more thorough and thoughtful you are with your runway, with your marketing, with your sales, with your like a projection of estimate revenue adjusted because of COVID, the more that you can talk about that, the better. But in terms of our thesis for FinTech, that won't change. But it's really about like, do you really understand how all these crazy things that are happening in the world is impacting you positively or negatively, and be able to answer that clearly.
Okay, another question. Not all fintech sectors are created equally. What fintech sectors are more likely to be seen as attractive to Hong Kong-based investors?
So maybe I'll start with this one. We as Invest Hong Kong have been particularly focusing on promoting fintech to Hong Kong for the past 4 years. And so for the 4 years, we've been trying to narrow down who do we actually talk to. I mean, we're open to talk to anyone, but we really don't want to waste anyone's time if there's no market for them. So number one thing that we see, as I mentioned before, huge market for whoever is focusing on B2B and providing services to banks and other financial institutions. There's no other place in Asia that has that amount of number of banks and insurance companies. What changed in the past 4 years, and that's the change that I've seen sort of happening, is banks were number one entity that you want to sell. Banks were a little bit slow to adopt technology in Hong Kong, and they started speeding up, and so they've been number one attractive source. Now it's also insurance companies. Insurance companies were again slow and much slower than banks. Now, if you provide services to insurance companies or services that can be used by insurance companies, you're in a good spot. Anything related to RegTech. RegTech is a very hot and attractive sector that maybe doesn't get that many headlines and doesn't bring the most excitement at conferences, but this is something that gets a lot of attention. So we have RegTech, blockchain solutions, blockchain related solutions. That's also something that has been attractive, especially if your solutions are not so much focusing around digital currencies, but for example, building ledger that can be used by banks or maritime companies. I mean, we have to remember that Hong Kong, apart from the financial hub, is also import-export hub. So, you know, if you can supply to maritime industry, that's great. And so anything also that particularly helps financial companies, enables them to operate better. As we like to say, Hong Kong is a great place for enablers, not necessarily for disruptors. If you're a disruptor and you're based in Hong Kong and you're already established, great. But if you are entering a market, you might want to actually be a company that just provides concrete solutions to banks. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, from my side, in terms of focus, I'm really big on embed fintech area. What that means is we're all over API. So banking as a service API, any bank connector, lending as a service, card issuing API, brokerage, insurance API, any sort of infrastructure play for banking, because we think a couple of big shifts is happening. One is, if you look at, well, just to start with, it's awesome to see Hong Kong MA give out the 8 virtual banking license. That's early 2019, and I think a few of them have already launched. I actually signed up for one, the Z8 one, purely on mobile, and able to do KYC on my Hong Kong ID card. And yes, I still have it, and it works. So that works. I love to test everything. And then guess what? Like the first, and I had the pleasure to meet with Bowtie. They're the first startup actually got the virtual insurance license in Hong Kong. And they have a really great story too. They worked in insurance company, the actuarial space in New York. couple Hong Konger, and then decided to move back because they really understand the actuarial science and crazy AI, and like a real, and they were the first one that actually got the virtual insurance license in Hong Kong. So I really, really love that things that is like real tech that you can potentially sort of bridge the gap with the traditional business to service sort of new customer. And then on top of that, I think like there is a big trend going on, and you start seeing that in the US already, which is even Apple work with Goldman to build out their app, like Apple Pay and credit card product. And then same thing when Google wanted to launch their own checking account. And all these guys are working with dinky little bank in the middle of nowhere in the US. And I think that this is a big trend. And then on top of that, Hong Kong MA, if you go to, I swear I don't work for any of these guys, but if you go to Hong Kong MA, you see like they already have the open banking API with the actual, like all the code is on the website with a very clear intention that what they are trying to do is not there yet 100%, but because we look at a lot of the banking API in the US, we're trying to basically sort of figure out the gap. And if, because no way that you'll be able to use any sort of US banking API to launch to service Asian customer. So if you're doing anything remotely close to that, we would love to talk to you, because this is something that's going to be your customer. It's going to be all kind of developers, app developers with a huge audience, but they want to bring in the banking component or the insurance components. Those are fascinating for us to see, and we'll love to talk to you.
Okay, we actually have a lot of questions, but I'm actually going to only allow one more. I do recommend that if you have follow-up questions, you send them directly to Michael or myself. I will be sharing our email addresses to wrap this up. But the last question is, in the US, startups use Meetup and Eventbrite to find pitch events to get in front of potential investors or get connections to VCs and angel groups. Is there a Hong Kong equivalent?
So there's one thing that I wouldn't say it's apples for apples equivalent, but one thing that, or actually two things that we created as Invest Hong Kong as a great platform for companies to connect. Throughout the year, we run 2 flagship events focusing on bringing companies from overseas and giving them an excuse to look at the Hong Kong as a market and to build those connections. Our flagship event is called Hong Kong Fintech Week. We host that event every year right after Money 2020 in Las Vegas, and right around the same time as Singapore Fintech Week. So if you're making a visit to the region, you might want to do it in early November. This is where both Singapore and Hong Kong host their events. We started with about, I think, 2,000 attendees. Last year we had 12,000. So the event has grown, not in terms of just attendee numbers, but also prominence. So we have all the largest fintechs and financial services firms from mainland China and Hong Kong. And this is a really good opportunity to start building your network. And the second event that we run is Start Me Up, a festival that typically throughout the year we organize in January. This year, Chris, this is not my event, so I'm not fully sure. I think it's moved to July, right?
No,
so,
it's in around June 23rd.
Okay, so it's actually coming up. Yeah,
it's completely virtual.
Again, a perfect opportunity for those who are based in, for example, Toronto and are not ready to go to Asia yet.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank everybody for taking part. I realize there are a number of other questions. I do encourage people to send us an email at the following the following email addresses. I realize that these are extremely difficult email addresses to write down, so I recommend that you just screen cap this. I
have an added level of difficulty with my last name, so
yeah, I think we have the world's worst email addresses. There were questions as to what online resources are available to read up about all this. send us an email. We'll send them to you. One of them is on our Start Me Up practice website. It actually lists every single funding opportunity that is in direct contact with InvestHK, and it is a very, very long list. And by clicking on each one, you actually are informed about the terms and conditions and the application processes for each. It is extremely comprehensive.
I just shared the link to that on the chat, so if anyone wants to get it.
But at this stage, I'd like to thank everybody for taking part. If you're a Canadian fintech, please feel free to get in touch with myself and Michael. If you're interested in taking part in Hong Kong Fintech Week as an actual physical event, I believe that's usually around end of November. Knock on wood, everyone's going to be able to fly by then without any quarantines or lockdowns. Get in touch. If you're a company that's intent or would like to know more about expanding into Asia Pacific via Hong Kong, let us know. We'd be very happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you all.
All right. Any parting words from you?
No, just a nice wave, and please email us if you have any questions.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.